thank you for coming. What a pleasure to have time with you. Fabian, thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you to GLOBArt for making it possible for me to be here. You heard in my introduction that I have the great pleasure of working with teachers around the world, which means that what I share with you doesn't come from me, but it comes from thousands of teachers that I've had the pleasure of spending days and weeks with in workshops where we struggle to identify the tools and strategies that will make learning more accessible to students. Sometimes I ask, what is good teaching? And I get all kinds of answers about carefully planned lessons. I get answers about good assessments and grading rubrics. I get information about timing and pacing and sequence of the curriculum. But sometimes people forget that good teaching is only about good learning. It's the outcome that we expect from our students that defines us as whether or not we are good teachers. So our conversation today and our time together really is about exchanging some ways that will help us to improve education to make sure that the next generation of learners can be as successful as they need to be for the incredible challenges that lie ahead. We know that tomorrow's learners are going to face some challenges we cannot begin to imagine. We don't know what kind of technology will exist in 20 years. I'm a little bit afraid to think about the world difficulties and challenges that they will have to address. And I'm not sure that we are preparing today's students for understanding the big concepts that they'll have to navigate in order to address complex interrelated problems. So our work together is really important. I hope that you'll play a game with me. First, I want you to take a look at something here. With your neighbor, can you describe what you see? With your neighbor, describe what you see. And with your neighbor, also use some comparative language. How can we compare these two? Okay, thank you for playing. Would you believe me if I told you that the two red shapes are the same size?
Yes.
I need some help to prove to the group. Can somebody come up? And we need to find a way to show that the two red shapes are actually the same size. Please, a couple of volunteers. Maybe we have to lift somebody. Does anybody have a string or a cable? How can we check these? Would anybody like to come and look on the screen and then share?
I just...
Come on. Have some courage with me. Good, good, good. Thank you.
Oh!
Here, if you want to, or we can check on the big board. What do you think? Do you want to check?
Let's take the board.
Okay, maybe this. I'm not sure.
Wow.
You need somebody else to help. Oh, good.
Yeah,
Okay.
great.
Let's solve this problem. This is important information for us.
We have here, so we now need how many centimeters, because we need to make a surface, to calculate the surface.
Well, I actually want to know if it's exactly the same. Not just the same amount, but if it's the same shape.
If it is the same shape?
I think it's the same shape. Go to the short side. Go to the short side.
Is this
Come
double the length of this?
No, it can be
It's gonna be the same.
Let's measure this one. Your big one.
So we just lift him up.
You want to measure?
I lift you up. I lift you up. On my shoulders.
Maybe a chair. I'm not sure. Do you want to take a chair? I think.
We need 4 people to
Oh!
It's okay.
Solved the problem already, yeah.
Yeah, we solved the problem. We made the problem go
We solved
away.
the problem.
Excuse me, is
Yes?
the question same height or same?
I think the red sides are exactly the same.
It's about the red.
The red side.
Okay, now.
You want to go to the edge? To the edge.
The edge.
Do you want the edge?
Edge because it's so yeah, actually we have to.
Or you can.
No, we don't need the edge.
Super, the same. Yes.
Are we sure?
Are we sure?
Okay, that's the long side. Okay, can you show that again? Corner to corner. Corner to corner. This one. Thank you. Hold your fingers. Yep. This one. Okay. Corner to corner. Good. That's great. Thank you.
Trick.
So really, the red sides are the same. It's the same shape. When I work on workshops with young students, I share this example with them, and with younger students, I just offer a simple discussion. The simple discussion that extends from the discovery that the red sides are actually the same shape. The simple discussion is that the context around the shape, the surrounding information, changes the way we see the shape. And so for young children, this discussion allows us to consider the way that culture changes our understanding, our experience, our background, our education, our values, our priorities, our finances, our resources, our personal experiences, all of that informs the way we see things. And this simple example allows a discussion of different perspectives to open up for young people. But since we're an education community in here, I would like us to think at a little bit higher level. So we know that at the very basic level, we can have a discussion about context and culture and perspective, right? But the bigger question is, even though we know, we've proven that the red sides on these two figures, the red sides are the same, my eye still tells me that one is long and the other is wide. Is it the same for you? Yes. So I know the red is the same. I've tested it. I have the information, but still my eye tells me one shape is long and one shape is wide. For us as educators now, we can go to a higher level in our thinking and in our exploration to consider that there is something very deep that can be a challenge or an obstacle when we're working to change the understanding or to offer a new perspective to the students we're responsible for. So consider this sometime when you want a discussion about culture and context, but sit with it longer. As an educator who wants to make a big difference, sit with this longer and think about why our eye continues to tell us something despite the empirical evidence that we have that we know something is different. I like it. So we know that there are some perspectives that can help students to be leaders for tomorrow's global challenges. There are some things that tomorrow's students need to be prepared for, and they're only going to get that preparation from us if we commit to being good teachers. Our previous forms of education have been fine up until now. We've been able to teach students to compute and calculate. They can categorize. They can repeat things. but they're not prepared for processing wrong answers. They're not prepared for risk. They're not prepared for a teacher to ask a question when the teacher doesn't even know the answer. But unfortunately, we know that that's where we have to go if we're going to be successful in preparing today's students for tomorrow's global leadership. We know that today's students seem to get conditioned to think less the longer they're in school. One of my favorite research studies asks small children to come up with a list of as many possible uses for a paperclip. What's paperclip in German? French trombone? Okay, so as many possible uses. And the young children give their answers. The same question gets asked to children a little bit older. The same question to children much older. I would expect, as a proud teacher, as a member of the education community, I would expect that the students who had spent more time in school with more exposure to ideas and facts and thoughts, I would expect them to have an incredible list. The reality is exactly the opposite. The youngest children, the kindergarten children, always come up with a fantastic list of extraordinary possible uses for a paperclip. Their brains have no limits at all, and they're already thinking things like, well, what if the paperclip is made out of rubber? What if the paperclip is 8 feet tall? What if the paperclip's made out of ice? They just have no limits to their thinking. But by the time we get all the way up to the educated child, we have a student who has spent so much time filling in the answer A, B, C, D, or E, looking for the right answer, that they're almost frozen, paralyzed, unable to think of a different use for a paperclip aside from holding paper. It's sad. The more time we spend in school, the dumber we're becoming. I didn't just say that, did I? Is that going to be on film? We've got a challenge for us in education if the results are what they are. Okay, so some thoughts about how we're going to move this next generation. I suggest to you that tomorrow's global leaders need to have some scary moments where they're out of their comfort zones and ready to take a chance to go into an unknown experience, an unknown way of thinking in order to achieve new knowledge and new understanding. The scariest part about that is it means we have to model that as educators. So if you're in school now, are you doing just enough to graduate? Or are you doing the kinds of things that extend into interests that are satisfying and rewarding, that make you curious to go beyond the minimum required assignment? Some people are smiling. I know, there are some days we just want to get the homework done. But our challenge is much bigger, and if we're committed to our vocation, and teaching is a calling, it's a vocation, if we're committed to it, then we have to feed ourselves and model the kind of curiosity and willingness to explore, the willingness to be uncomfortable. We have to model that for our students so they can be brave with us. The most important influence in a student's achievement is the relationship between the teacher and the student. Think back for a moment in elementary school. Probably there was a teacher that you didn't like or a teacher that you thought didn't like you, right? Ask yourself how you felt about that content area, or that subject, that class. Usually there's a direct relationship between the feeling you have with your teacher and the feeling you have with the subject. If you like your math teacher, you like math. If you don't like your math teacher, you don't like math. Or if you think your math teacher doesn't like you. So the most important recommendation or advice that anyone can give to an educator is to take the time to make a personal connection with the learner. It's the most important influence in the educational outcomes that you're seeking to achieve. Your students will work hard for you if they feel that you know them. You don't have to like them, but you do need to know what is important to them. Your instruction needs to reflect their interests and their backgrounds, and you have to start at whatever level they come to you. If they need support in background knowledge here, then there's no point in introducing your instruction at this level. They will never recover the gap on their own. If the students come into you with a lot of experience and understanding, and you introduce content information to them at this level, they'll fall asleep, they'll disconnect, you'll lose them forever. So we have to make sure that there's a connection first. It's just like anyone who travels. When you go somewhere, to another country, you check to make sure you know what kind of outlet you're going to need so you can keep your phone charged. If the holes don't fit, you get no power. So we make sure we have the same perfect fit, the same correct connection with our students so that the knowledge can flow through. I like it. Okay, another game. I was traveling, I got out of the airport in London at Heathrow, and this was one of the advertisements that was in the walkway. It's an advertisement from HSBC Bank. And I loved it so much that I found the image and I created an assignment for students to help us think about demonstrating our ability to use multiple perspectives. So in this HSBC Bank ad, we see a single image that's repeated, and each time the image is given a different label to show that that image can be understood in different ways by different people. It's so simple, but it's so big. We cannot take for granted that our understanding of a word, of an image, of a value, of an idea, we can't take for granted that any of those things will be the same to our students as they are to us. We have to negotiate the meaning and gather the understanding together. So this was the HSBC Bank ad. I asked a group of students, I was traveling with students in Costa Rica, and I told them about this assignment, I showed them the example, and I said, you have an assignment. At the end of the day, you need to text me a photo, and I wanted to have several words accompanying it. I didn't ask them to do the formatting, we were traveling. But I said, send me a photo and give me multiple words to demonstrate your ability to understand that single image from different perspectives. I would like for you to have a perspective from home. I would like for you to have a perspective from your destination. And I want you to have an additional perspective that shows me you really understand what we're talking about. Here's what I got. I like it. I got so many wonderful examples. And as happy as I was to see the examples, I was also reminded that really everything can be interpreted in different ways. And a careful educator has to take time to make sure that any discussion is centered around a shared understanding of the topic. I'm going to pause here because I hope that we'll have some time to play together in discussion and questions and sharing examples from our experience, and perhaps we can look at some other images together. Thank you for letting me start our conversation today. I appreciate it. Thank you.